YouTube fam, it's your girl Cindy. Welcome back to my channel. On this channel, I break down relationship dynamics in real life and on TV. Check out my playlist in the description after this video. If you are new to my channel, welcome and thank you for joining me today. As we kick off Black History Month, I have my two favorite guests back, Dr. Chelsea Morales, who is a psychologist, and Therapist Rowe, who is a marriage and family therapist, for another community conversation about normalizing mental health as individuals. In this video, we will be discussing the challenges Black people face while operating in white spaces. So be sure to like this video, subscribe, and click that notification bell. So ladies, as Black professionals in the healthcare field, how has your experience been navigating in white spaces?
I think one of the biggest challenges that is happening most recently is one of the issues around Black Lives Matter and the willingness to talk about this in professional spaces. So, as a therapist and as someone that's working with trauma, there have been lots of conversations about, George Floyd's murder or Ahmaud Arbery's murder and things like that in most recent years. And the difficult piece is that these are things that have been happening for years and years and years and years. And there's a certain level of outrage that's only happening now, because I think being in the pandemic, people are home more, they're paying attention more to the news. And in white spaces where white people are outraged about these things, but these are things that we've been outraged about for years that are only now being discussed, it's really challenging. And when people are wanting to talk about it more, and on some levels, there is a level of ignorance in thinking that this is something that's new and this is something that's only just happened, whereas we know that this has been our history for many years. So I think oftentimes one of the biggest challenges for me in particular is compartmentalizing racial trauma and having to show up in a white space for work every day. And in that process of compartmentalizing, I spend a lot of time trying to separate the two. So when they're being put together and these conversations are being pushed and wanting to talk about them openly, and it's difficult. It's difficult to manage your mental health around it. It's difficult because you're being inundated with it at home when it's on the TV, on social media, and then you go to work and then there's this urge or this desire to have these bigger conversations, and internally the experience is like, I've been dealing with this forever. Like, how is this just new to you? So it's challenging and it definitely can take a toll. I think for me, one of the things that I have done during, like, I'm thinking about particularly like 2020 when all of these things were in the forefront in the media, I asked to take time off from work. I asked to take some personal days because I just needed the space to feel all my feelings and not have to also show up and be a professional at the same time. And it's not an easy thing to do. And luckily, I was able to take that time off. But it's not something that everyone gets the opportunity to do. And I realize that and I'm grateful for it. But it definitely is hard when you are trying to compartmentalize racial trauma and showing up in these spaces where people want to have these open conversations, but they don't necessarily understand the impact that it has on Black and Brown individuals in those spaces. So that was my experience, just having a hard time navigating, how much do I participate? How much do I protect myself? How much do I take care of myself in these kinds of conversations?
I totally understand where you're coming from. Last year, actually, 2020 was one of the hardest years. Like you said, white people were like showing outrage when this has been our experience. And as a parent, when I walk into my daughter's school, I always feel like I have to put on a performance because I don't want to be labeled as the angry Black woman, because a white woman can have the same issue or challenge with the school system and she'll be labeled as a woman who is passionate about what she's talking about. But if I start to talk about the way I feel about the injustices or the lack of um, material that is being taught in the inner city schools, I am coming across to them as, you know, the angry Black person, or everybody starts to feel uncomfortable. And that's something that I've had to be intentional about. A lot of times I have to prepare myself, especially because sometimes my daughter doesn't advocate for herself. So I have to step in and advocate for her. And as a Black mom, I feel like the narrative is they're not expecting for Black parents to step up and speak up for their children. They're expecting them to just not be involved, and they have this picture of like Black families not caring about education and just letting the school system do what they may with our children. And I take an issue with that, and I speak up every chance I get. Prior to the pandemic, I was very active in the school system. I would volunteer. I would be there so they could understand that I wanted to be a team player. I didn't want them to feel like I was a threat. So if I had something to say and I was sitting at the table, they viewed me in a different way because I put in that extra effort in volunteering and being present at the school. Because when an issue did arise, they were less threatened, I guess you can say, because it's so easy for the minute you raise your voice, not even yelling or screaming, but as Black people, sometimes our voices are elevated, and all of a sudden we become the angry Black woman, and everybody's shaking in their boots. And it's like, I'm not going to attack you. I'm just a little passionate about this subject, and I want results, and I want to see what the change is going to be. And so that's been my experience as a parent. And even, growing up in school, the history that we haven't been taught in schools, there was a lot that I learned in 2020 that I hadn't known for my whole life. And I just turned 40 last year. And to learn about so much history that wasn't taught in the school system while I was growing up was very disheartening and very troubling. So I try to teach my daughter now as she's growing up some of the history that wasn't taught to us in the school system, that is still not being taught. And when it comes to Black History Month, I feel like they target certain leaders like Martin Luther King, but they're not really talking about all the inventors around the different things that Black people invented, but then somehow it's switched over to the white person getting credit for it. So that's my experience, and that's how I feel. What about you, Therapist Row?
I absolutely agree with the both of you. And, thinking about these spaces, I know in our field, it is white dominated. And the context in which we receive our education is through a Eurocentric lens. When I go back to grad school, I found myself, in a protective mode, meaning that we were, learning through the perspective of white people and taught through the perspective of a white person. When I think back to my professors, most of them, with the exception of one who was a person of color, most of my professors were white. And they were teaching from their white experience. And so I found myself being protective of our Black clients. In my school, we had a clinic where it had a one-way mirror. So we were able to observe these clinical cases. And I found myself being protective of those clients when my white peers were watching them, because sometimes they would say things that were inappropriate. And I would have to teach them that, a client's hair looking like this is not unkept or disheveled, or, it's not unprofessional. And I found myself, that's why I'm saying I found myself protective, and where sometimes I was like, am I doing this from where I come from, or am I doing the job of a therapist? And so that's where the blurred lines would be, because I'm saying that their identity is also my identity. And where I wasn't trying to go down basically the rabbit hole of just being this Eurocentric therapist, I wanted to bring myself to the room. And that takes me to interacting with clients who seek me out because I am a Black therapist. And when I say that, it's not to say that, oh, every Black therapist, if you're a Black person, you're just going to click with them. You do have to do your homework in selecting a therapist. But a lot of my clients have said to me that they sought me out because I was a Black therapist. And I know, going back to what Dr. Morales was saying earlier about 2020, and that was a difficult time for a lot of clients that came in because they were, as Coach CiCi said, a lot of people were learning new things about their historical identity, which caused a lot of questions and confusions for them. And so I was there to help them in navigating this. And as an ally, someone who can understand their experience as a Black person navigating through this world. I think that that was beneficial versus my clients saying that they didn't want a white therapist at that time. Some of them previously had white therapists where they would have to explain every last thing that they went through as a Black person versus coming to see a Black therapist who already knows some level to some extent of what they were going through. And I think that helped them in being able to be vulnerable with me.
I feel like that was my experience as well with, in particular, well, one with grad school, but also with my clients as well. I would definitely say one of the things that frustrated me the most in grad school was that we would have all these courses and there would be all these different conversations about all these different things. And then we'd have 1 week where we would talk about diversity issues. And that would be 1 week. And then the rest of it was just teaching us the content. But I always was frustrated with that because I felt like, okay, like the diversity issues are relevant throughout all of this work. It's not just an aside. It's not just this little added piece. It's relevant to everything. So I found myself being also protective, but frustrated with the material sometimes. And also like finding in certain situations, my white therapist counterparts would pathologize my clients or the people that we were working with at the time. They would observe, like, for example, Coach CiCi was talking about being perceived as angry. And when I would have clients or people that were angry or upset, and rightfully so, because things had happened and they were expressing themselves appropriately, that anger was oftentimes pathologized as something else, as opposed to just being seen for what it was, which was that this person was angry because they had a reason to be. So that was one experience with grad school. And then when you're talking about your clients, I think representation is extremely important. And it is not to say that just because you're Black and your client's Black that you know their experience, because that's not the case. I don't necessarily have the same background as all of my clients, but there are commonalities within the Black experience that don't have to be explained, and that it allows the therapy to move forward in a particular way because there doesn't have to be that additional time to explain what you meant when you said X, Y, and Z, or when you explain a certain type of family dynamic, or when you explain a certain type of interaction or exchange that you had between yourself and someone else. There's a level of that that's understood because we have a common language. We have a way of understanding each other. So I definitely think representation is important when it comes to therapy in particular. And it is hard when you're working in a practice or you're working in a space where, it's like, do they give you all the Black clients because you're Black? Or do they assign Black clients to white clinicians when they could be better served seeing you? And so sometimes it can get kind of tricky navigating that space where if your clients are being assigned to you or they're not seeking you out in particular, there's some questions around like, okay, what makes the most sense? Does it make sense for me to be a Black person and be seeing all the Black clients that get assigned here? I think the other issue in general is that it is a white dominated field. So there are not a lot of qualified Black clinicians that have, your credentials or my credentials. There are lots of people that are coming up, but they don't necessarily have the credentials that some clients are specifically looking for. And so then it becomes hard to find these people that they're looking to connect with. And so it can be tricky. So there's lots of different issues that come up. I think we try our best to navigate them. It's not always easy to, but it's an ongoing conversation that we should all be having with ourselves, even outside the context of Black History Month. Just what does it mean to be a Black professional? What does it mean to show up in a school space for our child? What does it mean to be a Black academic? All of these conversations are really important and relevant to just being Black in America and our experiences.
This has been a great dialogue. Thank you, ladies, for sharing your experience. I'm wondering what our viewers are thinking. Let's continue the conversation in the comments. Put your thoughts or questions below. As we wrap up this discussion, please remember to like and share this video. I want to thank you both so much for joining me once again for this much needed conversation. If there are any suggestions for future topics, please put them in the comments. I hope this video was helpful, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Bye for now.